The following is an interview between me and Vinny Marshall, who is the host of the Curious Task podcast, which you could find at thecurioustask.net. Vinny and I have known each other for a little while. We found each other on Facebook discussing modern money theory, and he was one of the hosts of the Think Liberty podcast at think-liberty.com, the Think Liberty Network, and he's the guy who actually invited me and Nima to come on and start hosting the Amagi podcast. So now that he's gone off and made his new podcast, he asked me to come on to talk specifically about intellectual self-defense, which, of course, I am always happy to discuss. And as the media that Vinny puts out doesn't include a YouTube channel, I asked him if it was okay if I took the interview and stuck it on my own YouTube channel, to which he graciously agreed. So without further ado, here is my interview with Vinny Marshall on the Curious Task podcast.
And I am joined tonight with Dylan Lawrence Moore. Dylan, how are you doing? And thank you for joining me this evening.
I am doing great, and thank you for thinking of wanting to talk to me in the first place.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Like I said, I enjoy these conversations very much. Now, going right off of that little intro there for you, when I wrote it, I kind of chuckled to myself because it almost sounds a little bit offensive, right? But it's not. And I mean this in the most literal way when I was talking about some of the ideas that you have, when I said that a lot of them are considered unorthodox, radical, and unbelievable. And I was careful to write it that way, and I didn't mean it as a slight, and I thought it could be a good way for us to start our discussion on intellectual self-defense, because as someone who believes in things, and talks about things and educates people on things such as MMT, I have to imagine that's something that a majority of the people that you're talking to are going to vehemently disagree with you. And they're doing so on the basis of very little knowledge that they have about the things that they disagree with you about.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yes. So that's kind of what I meant with the unorthodox and unbelievable stuff. And I'll let you take it from there. So why don't you help us out and help us understand what exactly intellectual self-defense is and how you came to have the ideas that you do about it.
So do you want like a whole background story, or do you kind of just want me to dive into the content? I mean, after I define my definition of intellectual self-defense.
Let's just go with what's natural for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds great. So intellectual self-defense, I actually stumbled across the term from listening to Peace Revolution podcast, which was created by Richard Andrew Grove. And he used the term a lot in the podcast, although I'm not sure if he uses it in the same way that I use it. The essential idea is that there are rules to discussion, there's rules to reason, and there's rules to logic. There's a certain way to do this. And for the sake of simplicity in this argument, we could say that, the rules of reason are the ones that Aristotle put down, 2,000 years ago or whatever. And in order for us to have a rational conversation, we've got to follow these rules. And when we don't follow these rules, suddenly we're not having a conversation anymore. The dynamic shifts a little bit. However, there's a trick that can be played where someone can give errors or look like or sound like that they're having a conversation and they're following the rules when in actuality they're not. And I mean, someone who understands logic knows where I'm going with this, whereas, that people commit fallacies. And what I emphasize, however, which I think makes me, unbelievable, radical, and unorthodox, or whatever my adjectives were,
right,
is when what I want to emphasize is that when you have a reasonable attempted interaction bump up into a non-reasonable attempted interaction, the non-reasonable actually supersedes the reasonable one. So the manipulation wins over the reasonable interaction. And what I noticed, particularly in myself, and then once I noticed it in myself, I noticed it in other people, is that a person who values reason when they bump into this situation, they'll respond by trying to be more reasonable.
Unpack that a little bit. Yes.
Yes. So they respond by trying to be more reasonable. So if we're, I want to think of what sort of example that I want to bring up. I'm not going to bring up MMT because I don't want this to accidentally turn into economics.
It's okay. So,
and it could.
You know what? Let's do our best to not get in the weeds with MMT. But if you need to use it as a benchmark for an explanation, I think that's totally valid. And again, Volitional Science Network, Amagi on the Think Liberty Network. If you want to hear about Dylan's ideas about MMT, please go there, listen to his episodes. There's no shortage of content with Dylan and his co-host discussing MMT. But if you feel the need to use it as an example, if it'll help you, by all means, and then we'll make sure to steer clear of those weeds.
But okay, I think I thought of a better way of doing this. Before I unpack it, I want to give this general description, which is essentially there's a reasonable way you and I can interact with each other, and then there's a fighting way that you and I can interact with each other, where one person is trying to submit, one person is trying to dominate the other, or get the other person to submit. And if these two interactions bump into each other, the dominate-submit interaction sets the interaction, whether or not the other person is trying to be reasonable.
Okay.
And what happens is if that person continues trying to be reasonable, they just lose by default in this dominate submit interaction because they haven't engaged in that interaction. And what my unorthodox idea is for the reasonable is looking at the reasonable person and say, look, if you find yourself in that interaction, stop being reasonable. You either need to leave the interaction or meet that person on that same level and recognize that you're having a fight. And this is why where the self-defense comes from. So the intellectual self-defense is A, learning how to identify that you are no longer in that reasonable interaction. And then B, okay, what moves can I use to deal with it now that I realize that I'm in a fight?
Right.
So, to get toward unpacking it, the background story for me on this is that I grew up in a very, very hostile household, and including my extended family members. My mother was really the big one, but all the family on my mother's side, I found out later, was very much like this, just viciously manipulative. It was like anything that came out of your mouth was nothing but fodder to be used against you. And I grew up in this, and I never knew any different. And I remember hating it, and that it was, for me, particularly if I ever spoke with my mother, there was no such thing as me getting ahead in a conversation. There was only damage control of how do I say the least amount of stuff so she has the least amount of fodder used to manipulate me with.
Right. How can I avoid showing this person who I really am the most while still, communicating enough to navigate through life?
Exactly. And what at one point in my life, so I live in Washington State, and I'm from Washington State. I bought a one-way plane ticket to Vermont, where I stayed with some friends for a year, and then I bought a one-way plane ticket to Europe, where I lived for a little over 2 years. And so 3.5 years goes by, and I came back home to Washington, and I had never visited once, not a single time. And while I was gone, that's when I started getting into like Peace Revolution podcast, and I got introduced to things like intellectual self-defense and what fallacies are and what the trivium is, and these concepts of critical thinking. And when I came back, I had this grossly erroneous idea that because I had learned so much and I had grown so much in the last 3.5 years, well, everybody else back at home must have done the same thing. And what I found was that particularly family members a lot of them were trying to stuff me back into the same box that they remember me coming out of, where they could just sit there and manipulate me. However, when I came back, it was like I started spotting first of all, the fallacies. And then I started spotting these patterns in the way people were talking. And I'm like, there is something very, very distinct going on here that I had entirely missed when I was, before I left. And what I started doing was fighting back. Where, once things got a little uncomfortable, I was like, fine, let's make this uncomfortable. I'm going to shout back at you, and I'm not going to capitulate. I'm not going to budge an inch, and let's just have at it. And it was like I had this split among my friends and family where the half of them were like, oh, hey, there's this new person here. Let's be curious and learn who he is, and grow and develop with him. And there was this other half that was just like, I'm not going to budge an inch. I no matter what you do, no matter what you say, I'm going to continue to try to put you back in that box where I can manipulate you forever and anon.
Right there. This is war now.
It had always been war. I was just always expected to surrender.
Right. They instead of understanding that the jig was up, as it were, heels were rather dug in and lines were drawn in the sand.
Well, that's what I did. Right. I dug in my heels and I drew my lines in the sand. And right. I see what you're trying to say.
Well, I'm looking at it from a standpoint, and I guess to your point, I guess people that have had a life full of this kind of behavior aren't probably thinking about the other options that exist. But for me, right, like thinking about it, I'm, just kind of trying to visualize this situation in my head, and I'm thinking, okay, well, when you see a family member come to you and they're a little different, you can go, maybe this is just because it's how my brain works. Right? You can go one of two ways, right? You can be understanding and accepting and patient of this person that you're talking to, right? Or you can, double down, dig in, and put the defenses up. But I guess,
or continue the manipulative bullshit. And
right.
I want to emphasize this part is, you mentioned that I can come off as abrasive, and I know what I just said would come off as abrasive. I typically give quite a few chances before I get hostile. And when I came back, my family was no exception, where it's like, look, I don't like the way that you spoke to me, and that doesn't really make any sense. And if you're going to talk to me, we need to address the method in which you're talking to me. And if their response to that was just to get more upset or more exasperated or more manipulative, it's I'm going, okay, this is getting a little weird. And if they do that 2 or 3 times, it's like, okay, obviously I'm not getting anywhere with this, so let's just cut the crap and let's have a fight if you really want to have a fight.
Yeah. And I don't think that necessarily abrasive is one of those words that I don't necessarily think it's always a negative thing myself personally, right? Like I do it too. Sometimes you gotta, sometimes that's just how it has
with
to
the
go.
brace. What was that the word?
Abrasive.
Oh yeah. Oh no. And sometimes I encourage people to do it because here's why. Is that some sophist fuckhead, and I don't know how much swearing that you want on your podcast here.
That's fine.
He has no hesitation whatsoever about being abrasive with you. However, you, the person that we've trained that you must always be reasonable, I'm going to humiliate you if you step out of line and even get slightly abrasive, even though I get to be abrasive anytime that I want to be.
Right. You need to behave, so I can't.
Yes. So the way I actually encourage people to respond to that is be equal or more abrasive in response. I mean, if you choose if you decide that battle's worth fighting.
Right. If you didn't elect to walk away from the discussion, as you mentioned earlier.
To show the person where it's like, look, I might not be able to change you. However, I'm going to make you think twice about messing with me. Well, at the very least, you're going to get more bang for your buck with your manipulative energy on somebody else.
Right. And it's, and hopefully think twice about the way that they approach discourse overall.
Exactly.
And I hope that's where it leads to. So, one of the main reasons I had you on here. So, I mean, at first, and I'm, this is for the listeners, obviously, this stuff, right? So, Dill, we've had multiple conversations, right? Like just on the phone talking about this stuff, and I've checked out your videos on the Volitional Science Network, and it took me a minute to totally wrap my head around some of the concepts that you go through. And I urge anyone who's interested in this topic and maybe feeling a little bit confused by the subject matter to go check out the Volitional Science Network. Maybe near the end, we can mention some of the videos that specifically talk about this, and I'll actually link them specifically in the show notes. I know you have like a whole step-by-step, kind of like the different varying degrees, and maybe we'll go into that here, maybe we won't, but I think that's important to go through. But I mention all of this because in learning this and in understanding it, so I love talking about politics and philosophy, and that usually leads to debate, and I love doing it online or in person or whatever that's engaging to me, right? But this kind of horrible discourse and narcissistic approach at debate and manipulation is rampant in these discussions. It really, really is. And as you've said, learning, obviously, I mean, I think that just comes like learning about fallacies, right? You start to kind of look up, your ears perk up, and you learn a little bit more about what's going on in discussions that you're having and what people are doing. When you start to notice this stuff, learning about the intellectual self-defense stuff really helped me clear a lot of the noise around discussions like that. I feel like a lot of times in those discussions, you just get to a place where you're frustrated, you're mad, something's going on that's not right. Something's going on that's frustrating you. But like I said, I think that's a good term for it. I've used it on this podcast before. Noise. It's noise, right? You just have all this noise and this frustration, and you can't really identify it. Going over the stuff with intellectual self-defense helped me give that noise a name, and what was going on a name, if that makes any sense. And
absolutely. In fact, so I'm glad that you brought up the fact that we met on an MMT forum, because I don't know if you saw it, there was what you're describing here, where you got this feeling that something's up, and
right.
What we're talking, of course, about like internet communication at this point.
Yeah.
But someone posted something in this MMT forum that was just beautiful to the point of what you were talking about. So I got it open here, and I want to read it. It's a quick paragraph. So This guy joins this forum, and this is a Facebook group that's MMT for libertarians. I'm sure most of the people listening to this will think that's an oxymoron, which is fine. I'm happy to chat about it. I understand how frustrating it sounds when I say that. But anyway.
Told you they were unorthodox ideas.
So this guy writes, I began engaging MMTers because I was intellectually curious, being an econ nerd and a grad student. But after being banned in the intro MMT group because members interpreted my discussing the implications of MMT as actually debating the merits of MMT, reasonably against the rules, but not the same thing, I am nearing the conclusion that MMT is shallow, and 90%-ish of the supporters have no clue what they are discussing. And just like because they mistakenly conclude that MMT justifies every program that they desire. Now, again, I don't want to look at any sort of economics out of this, or what MMT is or isn't. But when you look at this, so this guy gets banned from some other group, and then he comes in here saying, MMT people are idiots because I got banned from this other group.
I got it all figured out, you guys. You're all a bunch of dumbasses.
And so there's like so there's some phishing lures in here,
right?
And
yes,
and if you look at how people are commenting back, some people caught it and some people didn't, and I think it was pretty easy to catch in this case, where they actually started arguing about MMT, where they say, well, MMT isn't shallow because of whatever, or MMTers aren't idiots because of this reason or that reason. The people who responded that way completely missed the point. The entire point of this person posting this was to insult everybody in the forum.
Right.
And unless you address that person on that level where it's like, look, I understand you're insulting me, so I'm either going to insult you back or I'm going to refuse to talk to you unless you stop or apologize or whatever. If you just jump into actually trying to discuss the economics of what's going on, what this person now holds over you is they can insult you at any time and take away your power by calling you an idiot because they called you an idiot before and you never challenged it.
On this happens a lot, right? This happens a lot. It happens in person. It happens a lot more online. I think it's because it's easier for people to be assholes without having to talk to people face to face.
And I think the most important thing that makes online interaction so awful is people can't be interrupted.
Right. Well, you have that video where you're talking about this, like, wall of text, YouTube comments, and I think that's really pertinent because, and it's precisely what goes on, right? Is people will they'll tie in their insults with the arguments that they're making about the topic at hand.
I think you had that backwards. Sorry to emphasize that point, is that they're tying in their arguments with the insults. The insults are the important part. The arguments are just a distraction.
Oh, sure. But I think in the moment it feels the way I said it, but for the person doing it, it is the way that you said it. Yes, I think that's correct. But and then so as the person that's responding to it, your primary focus is I'm trying to debate this thing. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm here to do. Like you said, the other person is not there to debate that thing. They're there to insult you, right? And so in this situation, and this is the part that helped me a lot, like I said, with getting through the noise, is with not engaging in that conversation, but addressing, it's almost kind of like breaking the fourth wall, right? Like breaking that up and addressing like, no, okay, so listen, you're manipulating this discussion, right? And you can knock it off and we can continue our conversation, or I'm going to go ahead and find something better to do with my time. And that's kind of like the way I'll approach it. Right.
Right. And that's kind of the way you have to approach it on a forum, because what are you going to threaten? Right. You can't get in their face. You can't challenge them to a fight or something.
But even that really, it really throws people off. I think people are used to just kind of playing that game, and they don't get a lot of people that are going to just break through that noise right away.
Yeah.
And it gets to a tough part too, where I don't know if a lot of people are even cognitively aware of when they're doing this sometimes.
Oh, they're not at all. Yeah. They're not at all. And I think that's a really good point to bring up, is that in order to engage in anything remotely, consider that something that could be remotely considered as intellectual self-defense, you have to know what is and what isn't discussion.
Right.
And you have to start to be able to recognize when someone is setting something up. Sophistry, I think, is an excellent term for it. When somebody is setting up sophistry, that once you spot it, the first thing that you got to do is say, okay, stop the discussion. And this is to yourself. And if you can't identify it, then there's no way in hell you can identify it yourself, and you just don't even know that you're doing it.
Right.
And I mean, I certainly fell under this category.
I think if you can't recognize that you've been guilty of doing this at some point or another, you're probably not being honest with yourself.
Right. Or you just completely don't understand it.
Right.
At all.
Yeah. I think this is the nature of kind of, right? Like, and especially with philosophy, right? Like, you really want to be right. You've spent all this time learning about stuff, whatever it is that you believe, right? You really want to be right. You really don't want to be wrong on this stuff that you've dedicated so much time to. I get it. I understand. I think everyone kind of naturally falls toward a level of bias. I think that's harder to break through with on some people than it is with others, but I think it's natural.
I want to interrupt you again.
Go ahead, please.
I think you're projecting too much niceness on people.
What do you mean? Just in that we all, everyone does this.
Yeah, to say, I did a lot of research and I want to be right. That I mean, that's still a somewhat humble thing to say. Because you still did the research, right? You went forward and said, "I am going to learn something and figure it out."
Right,
and I have done it so much, I feel confident in telling that to somebody else. There's still a level of being humble to that.
Yeah.
There's other people who don't care about any of that shit. They just want to dominate you.
Yeah,
and they understand how to. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that, and a lot of them don't even do the research. To your point,
well, they're not interested. Who cares? I don't need it to dominate you.
Right.
All I got to do, in a narcissist will do this very, very well, is they'll start picking up on the vocabulary that you're using, and they'll start throwing it back at you.
That's the word. That one really gets under my skin.
Yeah, and that's the point.
Yeah. That's the goal.
Yes, and then they could be like, "Oh, you're so unhinged, and you just lose your temper so fast, and I don't see how anybody can deal with you if you're just such an awful person that just can't handle stuff like this.
Why are you so emotional?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's very common.
They set that up to have that happen.
Yeah. And that's a tough one too. That's a really frustrating one because I'll do this a lot with people when I go, and I find myself often getting into conversations where I give the proclamation, look, I'm going to walk away from this discussion, or we can get past this noise. And then people all the time, like they're oftentimes the response, whoa, why are you getting so worked up? Listen, I'm not worked up. I'm calling you on your shit. Right. And so I'm just letting you know that I notice what you're doing. And if you continue to do it, I am going to abandon thread. I'm not going to talk about this anymore.
And I think that brings up another issue with internet communication is you have no idea what emotion is behind those words that somebody wrote. More than likely, you're going to project your own emotion onto those words. And if there's a sophist or a narcissist or some other flavor of asshole around there, they're going to interpret it the way that they want to, which is, you're being passive aggressive or you're getting heated or you're getting emotional or whatever to make you look bad. And for the unfortunate reason on internet posting, there's this strange psychological phenomenon that whoever posted last looks like they're right.
That's really weird. That's really, really weird.
Well, and I think it makes sense because it just sits there unchallenged.
Right.
And particularly on like Facebook and YouTube, it's one thing if it's a forum and you got to sit there and scroll through everything and see what everybody said. On YouTube, all you see is what the first person said and what the last person said.
Yeah. That's really unfortunate.
So all you see is what the first comment was, what the dickhead challenge was, and then nothing. So for that reason, I try to avoid getting into anything on Facebook or getting into anything on YouTube because 90% of the time it just goes down that route.
I've had some really productive discussions.
I said 90%, not 100.
That's true. On online mediums, but clearly there's been a lot of bad ones. I love those discussions. So I usually try to do my best to make sure I'm communicating mostly with people that are prone to not do those kind of things. But like you said, it's such a high ratio of it happening. It's really, really difficult. Earlier here in the opening of this, you did say something interesting that the manipulator comes out on top. Perception-wise in these discussions, as if the game supersedes the real discussion, as it were. Why do you think that's the case?
Because we're more fundamentally emotional creatures than we are rational ones.
Very, very Humean. I like that.
So, and I mean that in a literal biological sense.
Yeah. Yep.
So, in my understanding of neurology, which is slim, this is from reading a book on neurology and my own training and stuff like this, is that all brain function is tied to motor movement. To the extent that the only reasons we have brains is because we move. And there's no firing of neurons that doesn't occur without corresponding muscle movement, and there's no muscle movement that occurs without neurons firing. And what this means is that thinking requires muscle movement, and feeling requires muscle movement. And when you look at the muscles that are required to move in order to do these things, obviously, like if I want to stand up and walk across the room, I'm using essentially all my muscles to do that. If I want to feel something, I'm using a little bit less muscles, and if I want to think something, I'm using a little bit fewer muscles than that. However, the muscles required for feeling are way more overwhelming than the muscles required for thinking in terms of what they do to your own body.
Mm-hmm.
So, and on top of that, if we're going to have an interaction, and I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to be, let's say, just an outright asshole. I'm going to come and get in your face and call you names and maybe even shove you around a little bit. I think it makes sense that sort of interaction does not allow for something as complex and nuanced as critical thinking and discussion to exist. It just overrides it. In a similar way, like if you and I were going to play a game of chess, and in chess we've got these really specific rules, really specific pieces, really specific board, and a specific way to win the game. If I just start knocking pieces over and making up rules, we're not playing chess anymore.
Right.
And if you keep trying to play chess requires both of us to follow the rules. So if you keep trying to play chess, it's just not going to work.
Right.
You just look like an idiot.
You're going to have a bad time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're going to lose the game, which is being played, which is who gets to make up the rules.
Right. So then essentially the answer to that question, as far as why the manipulator comes out on top, what you're saying essentially is that when someone starts to change the rules of the game, that kind of puts them in a place of control, if I'm understanding correctly. And when you try to fight back against that in a way that takes their changing of the game somewhat seriously, you're just kind of feeding into it.
I think I can get a little bit more specific.
Please.
So when we talk about reason and logic, there's literally specific rules similar to the rules of chess.
Sure.
Right? There's a way that you and I need to go back and forth and explain ourselves in order to be considered something reasonable. And in fact, we've got Aristotle. I mean, whether we agree that's the iron rules of logic, I think we could say he got pretty close. We could turn to that and say, well, did we follow those rules or not? They're right there.
Mm-hmm.
And if we didn't, well, then what are we doing? If we're not being reasonable, where have we gone by default?
Right.
Well, now we're struggling for control because we're not being reasonable. It's not an information exchange. It's just orders. You do as I say.
Right. Even though it's not explicitly orders, that's what the behavior dictates. Right. So if you're imagining like the chess game, right, it's just to kind of help frame it, right? Like when someone starts changing the rules of the game, just like you said, you're left with a couple options, right? You can either get up, decide I'm not playing this game, or you can recognize the fact that, hey, you're changing the rules of this game. We sat down and played this game. We can either play the game or I'm going to go. And when you just sit there and let them do it, yeah, right.
Yeah, and then, to expand on this chess metaphor, let's say I moved my knight 3 squares one way and one square the other way, and you're like, hey, no, dude, it's 2-1, not 3-1. And I'm like, oh, it's 3-1 for me because of this bizarre reason. Think of your childhood idiot friend growing up who was always able to come up with some reason why he was allowed to have this rule and you weren't. And if you get into an argument, excuse me, if you capitulate to that and you're like, oh well, okay, I guess maybe you're right, and you get to move that knight that way when you want to, and I don't. You've accepted the order that he gets to change the rules.
Right, all bets are off after that.
All bets are off after that. Now, if you say, look, dude, I am not going to let you make that move. And he's like, oh, but it's just this one time. It's just this one thing. Look, I'm not even taking a piece with it. What's the big deal? And you say, look, no, man, we're playing chess. Chess has these rules, and I'm not letting you make that move. What's going to happen is the true colors are going to come out pretty quickly. Because if the guy backs down, he's maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe he forgot the rules of chess and he didn't want to admit it. Maybe, you got someone you could work with. But if they get more manipulative or if they get hostile or something like that, you know that this is a person that it's impossible to play chess with.
Right.
That anything they do to you that looks like chess is a fake.
Right. That's one of those when it's almost always a better idea to disengage and walk away. Real life or online?
Online, I would say I would agree with you. Real life, I think these people need to be challenged.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I guess it all depends on what your goals are. But I mean,
my goal. So one of my goals is, and you mentioned this before, I want that person to think twice.
Yeah.
About the fact that you might bump into somebody like me again.
And I do agree with that, right? I do think that this plays a little bit into what you said earlier too. I am exhibiting a little bit of this behavior that you talked about earlier, right? Which is like we have been taught, I guess. I hate saying it like that because I don't want to make it seem like it's this like mass brainwashing, although it probably kind of is, of like, be mellow, be rational, don't make a scene, right? Like be proper. And I think that we get that beat into our head so much that like, that's how to be. You lose track of the fact that sometimes it is better to stand up and, not deal with it. And like, as you said, hopefully make people think twice about their methods, because to be completely honest, if they had encountered more people that challenged the way that they approach things, they likely wouldn't have got to where it is when you faced off against it.
Yeah. Well, and then, let's say two ideas are coming to my head at the same time, and I got to pick one. So I'm going to go with that one. All right. An additional issue on top of this is that if you do have that interaction, and let's say someone is, and I'm going to keep continuing the chess metaphor because I think it's a perfect metaphor for describing reason and logic, due to the fact that it's got very specific rules and a specific way to win, and if you're not following those rules, then you're not playing chess.
Right.
And the same way, if you're not following the rules of logic, you're not having a logical discussion anymore. Is that because any audience that you might have more than likely doesn't know what's going on, they are going to side with the asshole. And after you have the altercation, they're going to turn to you and look at you and say, wow, you're an asshole for starting that fight.
So now this is fascinating. We've talked about this on a prior episode, and I want you to go into this more. This phenomenon. Why does it happen? And I've noticed it doesn't happen all the time. Recently I got into a discussion with someone where I did call them out on what was going on, and there was actually people that were reading along that had experienced the same thing I was talking about. I think so. That's one of those times where it wasn't as hard. The audience was kind of aware of these tactics, and they had been subject to them as well. And that was actually kind of nice because I had a little bit of support on my side from standing up to this, you know, kind of manipulation. But why does that happen? Why do you think people do that?
So I think that happens because, first of all, they don't understand any of this. They whether it's my unorthodox approach or whether it's your logic course at your local university, and I guess you can't even say that anymore because they just teach, you know, all white authors are white supremacists, so we can't read Aristotle sort of shit now in logic class, I guess.
Oh my god.
So pretending that wasn't the case anymore, you know, even with your classical logical training or classical critical training, or even if you're reading the Trivium or whatever else, people don't get that at all. So they are unable to differentiate between what's a fight and what's a discussion. And for a lot of people that are, to them, there's no such thing as a discussion. And I haven't put it in this language yet, and I'm shocked I haven't because it's pretty important. A discussion allows us to have a win-win interaction. You and I can discuss and figure out what we both want, what we both don't want, and, you know, find a solution that benefits both of us. Mm-hmm. A fight is win-lose. One of us wins and gets what we want, and the other one gets nothing. Now, for a lot of people, and you mentioned systemic brainwashing, I mean, we can get conspiratorial if we want, but I think all we have to do is turn to the family unit and say, okay, for a lot of people growing up, like me, this was literally the case. There was no such thing as a win-win interaction. All interactions were win-lose. So they graduate the household, never having grown the muscles required for them to recognize what a win-win interaction is. And so when they see that you're trying to have a win-win interaction, or excuse me, when you're trying to have a win-win interaction, what they're going to see is that you're trying to win, therefore they must be losing.
Right. And, you know, God damn it, they just spent their whole youth losing. They're an adult now, and that means now they get to win.
Yes.
So
but I haven't answered your question yet. The answer to the question is, so because their totality of understanding what interactions are based off of dominate and submit, well, what they do is they organize themselves like a dog pack. They just follow the nearest alpha.
Right.
So I think what's happening, and I mean, I know if some of the conversations that you have people that know you, and like you said, that they're reading the whole thing. But what I've found is that originally I used to be concerned about, let's say I got in an altercation with somebody, and I'm talking more about in person and less online. If I get in an altercation with somebody after, you know, beating my chest like a gorilla and scaring the other guy off, I've got everybody else would turn around and look at me and say, hey, you started this fight. They don't do that to me so much anymore. And I think the reason is all they're doing, because they don't understand what the reason in the discussion is. They're just looking for the nearest alpha. If I come out of the fight being the alpha, well, then they're like, oh, well, that's the new alpha. I guess I better listen to him.
It's a sad state of affairs for those.
It's a totally sad state of affairs.
Yeah.
But I mean, what else are you gonna do?
Yeah. I mean, at this point, it's just it's an observance, right? Not a prescription. But it's true. You know what's funny is I tend to have more patience online, I think, than I do in person.
Strange.
It is strange.
I think of the other way around.
I think I have more patience because I just know that other people have less of it. So I just know that, like, okay, I gotta have a little more patience here. I think people play a little more fast and loose here. But the reason is I notice when I have more patience, you can sometimes you can cut through that stuff successfully. Sometimes you can, right? Sometimes you can cut through it. People kind of snap out of it a little, right? Like you call them on it and they, you know what? You're right. Let's come back down to earth here, have a discussion. That actually works sometimes.
It does. And I think that's, if we're going to proselytize this, if we're going to put on our intellectual self-defense missionary hats on, those are the people we're looking for.
Absolutely.
To converge.
Absolutely.
Where you have the capability, you just don't know yet.
Yeah, you like, notice what you're doing, and when someone brings it up to you, you have enough self-reflection and honesty and humility to say, well, shit, I think you're right. Sorry about that. Let's start over.
Yep. Yeah. And I think those are the people that need the tools like this. Again, whether it's my flavor or where else you get it from. In hopes of turning them into another person who can stand up for themselves, use some intellectual self-defense and say, look, I understand what being reasonable is. You're not doing it, and I'm not going to let you squirrel around me and try to manipulate me with it.
So you know what I realized this is really useful for? Specifically. I mean, it really is. It really is. And I'm not just blowing smoke here. It actually, I think it is at least. But so gaslighting, right? That's a big problem.
Oh God, yeah.
And it's a specific form of manipulation. It's very difficult to deal with, and dealing with it over time can be really damaging mentally, even if you are the smartest person in.
I was going to say, do you want to give a definition / example of gaslighting so we're all on the same page? I hate gaslighting.
Yeah. And keep me honest. Let me know if I'm misrepresenting the term here. But gaslighting is essentially when someone just kind of decides they're gonna bend reality, right? And so you kind of think about that win-lose dynamic that Dylan was talking about. You kind of put it along with argumentation, right? And it says, okay, so I don't have to be wrong if I just alter reality, right? And so, this can come in little forms like people just asserting that things that we all know are true aren't, right? Telling you that you remembered something wrong, or telling you that something that we know the definition of and everyone is pretty fairly in agreement of the definition on isn't what everyone knows it is. And they will stand firm on this, and they will make you feel like you're the crazy person. And they're very, very persistent in that. Did I get that close enough?
You have a wild imagination. I can't believe you're coming up with such fantasies. Right. Why are you trying to show everybody that I'm so awful to you by making up these awful fantasies? You should be ashamed of yourself.
Right, making you feel like the crazy person.
Yeah, and this is like narcissism 101.
Yeah.
Where they will do something awful to you, just horribly awful to you. And if you try to bring it up to them, particularly if you try to bring it up to them in front of somebody else, they like a halo will pop over their head, and they'll just be like, oh my God, what sort of wild imagination do you have?
Well, and this is so...
Yeah, well, how could you possibly remember it that way? I don't remember it happening that way. Go ahead.
No, I hate it.
Yeah.
And when it gets really sinister is what you were talking about, when they start using your own arguments against you, using the things that you... weaponizing the things that you say, weaponizing the things that you like against you, right? And so I think it's pretty clear to see how quickly narcissism, gaslighting, and this kind of dominating approach at discourse can get very mentally damaging very quickly.
Well, and then let's put an asterisk here real quick about narcissism. So I didn't realize this until I actually started stumbling across articles talking about narcissism, particularly narcissistic parents, where I found out that my mom fit the description bullet point by bullet point. Is that narcissism is like sophist on steroids. And these people need to be seen as incredibly dangerous subspecies of human that's different from you. And when I talk about intellectual self-defense, it will not protect you against a narcissist very well. Because the narcissist is so agile and so adroit at picking up the language that you're using and gaslighting and playing themselves off as a victim and getting you tripped over on yourself, even if you are like super skilled 42nd degree black belt at intellectual self-defense, they will still trip you up.
Yep. And
they will still trip you up.
It'll make you crazy.
The prescription of what to do to somebody who's using sophistry against you is not the same prescription of what to do against a narcissist at all.
Yeah. So what would you say those differences are?
Say that again.
Oh, I'd like to hear those differences that you would consider. Right? You say the way to address them is different. I'm curious to hear what those differences would be. So
you mean there's a different way to address them?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's only 3 ways to deal with a narcissist. One is you completely remove them from your life. 2 is if for some reason you have to interact with them, when you do interact with them, agree with everything that they say, and then once they're gone, just go back to doing whatever you were doing.
Right.
No joke. I'm
right.
repeating what I learned when I read in an article. And the third one that I did not learn in the article is physical violence.
Right.
Lead supplements.
Sure.
I'm serious. I don't know what else. Like, if these people are so awful to you, and the narcissist, to put it from their standpoint, I always used to think that to call somebody a narcissist was just an insult that you threw at somebody who was like really into themselves, particularly physically.
Right.
A narcissist is somebody who requires constant admiration, cannot be wrong in anything that they say, and sees any form of punishment for anybody falling outside of what they think the way things should be as completely justified. So any tiny little disagreement, or maybe it wasn't even a disagreement, maybe they thought you disagreed with them, is the retaliation to correct that. I mean, whether it's physical violence or manipulating you or stealing from you or getting you fired, or, I mean, just think about all the social justice warriors who'll jump on Twitter and get people fired for shit they didn't even say.
Oh, absolutely. It's yes.
Any form of punishment is justified in order to correct the fact that you are vaguely, maybe kind of, sort of not 100% accepting my worldview.
And that's, and so that, and that's precisely why I brought up how damaging the gaslighting attempts could be. And I think you outlined really well kind of what you're dealing with when you get to that level of stuff. And I think you make, a valid point that when you're at that level of manipulation, you got to take other routes, right? It's one thing to swim against the current. It's another to just float there. There's nothing that you can do whatsoever to alter. You know what I mean? There's no attempt, no approach. That's why, like you said, all of your options there, were either like pretend like you're paying attention and then just go back to whatever you're doing before, right? Everything is just kind of like disconnect, or go to an extreme, because it's really all you're left with. Yes. And although I will say this, this is my testing with it. And I've only tested so much because I try to avoid my interaction with these people at all costs. However, I figured out that the narcissist sees reality in one dimension.
And that dimension is leverage that they can use against other people. And whatever form that leverage comes in, it doesn't matter whether it's emotional or physical or financial or social or political, whatever, doesn't matter. All they see is leverage. So if you have the power to take their leverage away, they will run from you. Because what the narcissist does, on top of the fact that they have to have their worldview a certain way and it can't be denied, they also have to have people constantly reinforcing it. They need constant praise. They need constant worship. And I'm sure, as I describe this, most people listening to this will suddenly remember somebody that they met at one point in their life, is they will surround themselves with sycophants.
Yeah.
And anybody who comes within that zone who doesn't turn into a sycophant, they just have a really good reason for not having you around. That they'll either have a really good convincing reason why you shouldn't do this anymore, or they'll be mean to you, or they'll get the other people to be mean to you, or something like that.
Right.
If you have the ability to start removing their power over others, oh God, they'll run away from you.
Oh yeah. Big time.
Holy shit. They got somewhere else to be real fast.
Yeah, they'll bail.
So
they'll absolutely bail.
Yeah. So to contradict myself, I guess there is a fourth thing, which is figure out how to remove their leverage, and then run, because they're gonna, if you let your guard down, they're gonna be scheming and waiting for it.
Well, that's like kind of like what you said, though, right? Like that's just kind of what. This is a natural result of, like, it's kind of connected to what you said before when it's like, okay, well, there's a new alpha now. And I think that comes with, sometimes it comes with unintended consequences, and that's probably one of them, is them waiting in the wings for you to make a misstep. But yeah, kind of going back to what I had talked about in the beginning, is this, all of this content, all of these discussions centered around intellectual self-defense are really useful, and like Dylan said, like you were talking about, not a lot of options. So there aren't a lot of options when you get to that level of manipulation, but it's even, the stuff that we're talking about is even useful there, because just being grounded in those situations is so valuable.
Yeah.
It's so valuable. And it's so that clarity is just of the utmost importance to me, at least. I don't know. I've been in those situations.
It is. And to go on that. So going back to my timeline when I talked about it. So I traveled for 3.5 years and I come back to Washington. There was a couple times when I would bump into people, or, talking to people who turned out to be sophist assholes. And when they would start pulling their shit on me, I just remember, like, in slow motion, staring at them in disbelief, like, does this guy actually think I don't notice what he's doing?
Right.
Like, am I supposed to take this for fucking serious? Like, what?
Right. Do you really think that I'm not aware? Yeah. Well, because when you notice it, when you train yourself to see it, when you're grounded like that, when you can realize when these things are happening, which, again, I put a lot of value on that. It's the clarity is fantastic. But so when you notice that's happening, it's impossible to not now. And you just that's exactly, I think you put it perfectly, right? It's just this in disbelief of like, do you really think that I'm just not picking up on what's going on here?
Well, and on top of that, it's like, how are you not embarrassed for yourself spewing that shit out?
Right.
Like, how are you not spontaneously combusting from your own embarrassment? I just don't get it. I just don't get it.
Well, because once you notice it, it's so obvious. That is,
yeah.
And that's very true. Like this, like I was talking about the conversation that I was having the other day, where I, was employing some of these tactics, and it's like that's exactly how I felt. It was like, how are you not embarrassed with yourself the way you're carrying on right now? And you could go ahead, and I went ahead and I read through the other thread, and this individual was talking to other people, and it's the same and then you start, like, once you notice what's going on, then you notice patterns, right? And so you're just reading along. It works the same way in person. You can look at the way people talk to other people. You start to notice patterns, and then everything, just that clarity comes so much faster. Like, once it's open, once it's unlocked, once you see what's going on, the download is happens at a much quicker rate. You become much more aware of
Thank you for bringing that up faster. So we've been talking a lot about intellectual self-defense. I actually haven't talked about any of the techniques I've developed.
Please.
For what I've used in intellectual self-defense. And speed is everything. I mean, if you're on an internet forum, you got time to think about it. But in person to person, or even in a conversation like you and I are having right now, if one of us turns sophist, speed is everything. And one of the things I realized when I was studying the trivium and getting into like the formal rules of logic is they're so slow. Like, in order to like break down the syllogism and figure out exactly what fallacy is going on is really slow. And there's patterns I started recognizing in the way people were talking that allowed me to start saying, okay, I don't need to go into like the syllogistic breakdown of what's going on or identify the fallacy. I've already seen this pattern before, and I already know where we're going with this. So I can just, put my boxing gloves on and be like, all right, I'm ready.
Right.
I'm in the ring. I'm here. Let's go.
Right.
And I think I found when I've done this when people are watching, and I think this is also where why I may come off as abrasive comes from, is that it looks like I was bipolar.
Well, sure, because you go from one gear to another on what seems like the drop of a dime.
Right, and because I spotted what was happening way before somebody else did, or even if they ever were going to in the first place, and I just don't have any patience for it anymore.
Right. So by the time you make the shift, by the time you make the proclamation that you are aware of what's going on, and you'll not be pandering to the power struggle, right? The win-lose, as you were talking about, you have already burned out your patience at that point, right? You before you said that, before you got to the point of mentioning where you're at with this and where your limits lie, you had already tried to be patient for some time before you mentioned what was going on, right?
Well, yeah, it's. I guess it's more of a collective punishment problem, and maybe this isn't the right way for me to do it, but it's just like, if I've seen the same pattern 100 times from 100 different people, and this person comes up to me with the same fucking pattern, acting like he's got some sort of unique spin on something, and right. I'm like, I do not have the patience to pretend like I haven't seen this before.
Yeah, and then like right back to what you were talking about with the speed.
So I've got a specific example that came to my mind, and this is not the one with me sitting at the table in Germany, because I know you've heard that one before.
That's a good one, though. I'm going to find that episode, and I'll make sure to include it in the show notes. But what he's talking about, and I hate to interrupt you, we can get going right back.
Go for it.
Dylan talks about one of the early interactions he had that made him realize kind of...
it was the interaction.
Yeah.
When this stuff actually clicked. It was that one.
Yes, the relevance of everything kind of that we're talking about, when it really kind of put the light bulb above his head, as it were. And I'll go ahead and link that in the show notes. So if you want to hear that story, you can do so after you're done listening to this.
So... I come back from Europe. I've been a vagabond for like 3 years of my life. And I'm like, I got to do something. And this was right when Washington State legalized pot. And I had a friend who I knew from the past. I trained Aikido with him in the past, who contacted me one day. And he said, hey, Dylan, me and my friend were starting a pot business, an I-502. We want to be a grower and a processor, and per state law, we have to have a technician on the team And because you have a chemistry major and you have laboratory experience, you are technically a technician. So if you're willing to be on the team, even if you don't, like, we'll give you like 3% or something. You don't even have to work. We just need your name on the fucking thing. However, if you want to be involved, we're happy to have you involved. And I'm like, fuck yeah.
Bring it on.
I'm in. So I moved down to Seattle with these guys, and they stayed in a house, and they also started a landscaping and general contracting business to fund the I-502 business. I-502 was the initiative that passed the legalization.
Sure.
And so I'm staying with these guys, and my buddy was kind of the contract salesman aspect, and his friend was kind of the foreman manager of actually doing the jobs. And so we're working, and things are going okay. And I was actually starting to talk to them about this sort of stuff. I didn't have it formulated at the level I have it formulated now, but I was talking to them and letting them know what I had been starting to figure out. And at some point, his friend got very badly injured, and he couldn't work and essentially be the foreman of the jobs. And so my friend, and I'm going to use the name Ted. That's not his name, but we'll just stick with it.
We'll call him Ted. Yeah,
we'll call him Ted. Ted suddenly had to be everything. Now, there was a specifically big job that we were working on. I'm thinking, even though I'm not part of the landscaping business, that this is personal to me because we're using this to finance the bigger thing, which is the I-502. So I'm feeling like I'm part of this team, and I really need to take this seriously. So I really want to get this job done right, and plus I want to get paid because we all want to get paid to get the job done and get the paycheck. And I had this weird thing that started happening with Ted, where anytime he said we were going to do something, it never happened. So Dylan, we're going to start at 7:30 tomorrow morning. We wouldn't start until 8:30. Dylan, we're going to paint this thing over here, and then as soon as we get to the job, and then we get there, and he starts laying grass seed. And he wouldn't tell me that he changed his mind. He just started doing something else, and I'm like, my way of working, particularly if it's something like landscaping or construction or something physical, where it's like, do your first task, finish it, move on to the next one, so that first one's done and you don't have to think about it anymore. And he's kind of dilly-dallying over everything and not really finishing anything and moving back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got a little bit frustrated, and I wanted to talk to him about, like, look, I think there's a better way that we might be able to do this, and I feel like you're changing things on me. And I'd really appreciate it if you could
work with me here.
Yeah, work with me here. Like, I understand you're the boss. I understand things are changing. Things change all the time. Just kind of like, let me know what's going on. And he walked away from me. And I was like, huh? So then he came back. He's like, hey, I'm going to go get lunch. And I'm at the point. I'm like, okay, this is getting weird. I'm coming with you. And so we went to talk. I hop in the truck. We go get lunch, and I bring it up again, and he starts accusing me of wanting to be micromanaged. And I'm like, I'm just asking to know what's going on, man. And so that was really weird. And we get back to the house, and I had worked for 9 days straight at that point. And I'm like, dude, can I have, I really need a day off tomorrow just to rest my muscles. And he's like, fine. So he goes to work the next day because he's the boss and he doesn't just get to take a day off when he wants. And so he comes back that night, and he's like, hey, man, are you able to talk in about 30 minutes? And it's leading up to this. This is the climax here. And I go, sure. I figured it has something to do with what we're doing, what we were discussing before. And so 30 minutes comes, and we sit down at the couch, and he kicks his feet up on the coffee table, and he says, I see you really have a lot on your mind. You go ahead and start. And I'm like, motherfucker, you asked to talk to me.
Yeah, what is that? You're going to ask? All right. Okay.
And we were talking about gaslighting. He sighs and says, no, you need to start. And I go, no, you asked to talk to me. You start. So he gets irritated and he's like, well, fine. And he says, so we're having this issue where you're seeing my decisions as me not giving you accurate information. Did you catch that? So we're having an issue where you're seeing my decisions as me not giving you accurate information.
That's just such a mess.
So here's the issue. The key component here is the word seeing. It's not that I'm giving you inaccurate information. You're seeing that I'm giving you inaccurate information. That's the manipulation.
Right.
So the way I responded is I interrupted him right there, and I said, no, you are giving me accurate. You aren't giving me accurate information. That's what's actually going on. And we actually went back and forth on this. He's like, no, you're seeing it. And I'm like, no, you're giving me bad information. And then he yelled at me and he's like, no, you choose to see me as not giving you accurate information. And I just jumped up and I was like, dude, I quit. I'm out. I'm done. I'm not putting up with your fucking shit.
Oh, what a mess. What a mess. Well, I mean, the most frustrating part of that too is like the way he opened that up.
Yes.
Is such a dishonest way to
But let's get
feedback.
specific. Let's get specific. Why exactly did he do that?
I'm not entirely sure, right? But all I know is that if someone came to me, if I was working with someone and someone came to me and they were like, look, we need to make this a little more efficient. I think I have some ideas about what we could do to clean up our workflow here so I could be a little more on the same page and we could kind of, be better as a team. Right. The way he responded is, I think, among some of the worst ways you can respond to someone saying something like what you had said to him.
Yes. But fast forward a little bit, specifically to the, hey, can I talk to you in 30 minutes? And then saying I could start.
Which is totally absurd.
But
totally absurd.
But why did he do it? What was the purpose of doing that?
I would assume, if I had to guess, he felt challenged in the first place.
I'm asking a strategy question. What was his strategy for doing that?
Oh, probably to put you off, to make you feel like you did something wrong.
I guess I'm trying to play a game of guess what I'm thinking.
Sure. Well, I mean, it just seems to me like more manipulation, right?
It's absolutely, definitely manipulation. And what he's doing by saying, okay, but by going completely opposite. So essentially he comes to me and he says, hey, I want to have a conversation. And he flips it around and says, okay, you start.
It makes you the person with the issue.
Well, and it's a power play. He's changing the rules as we go.
Okay.
Or he's trying to. I didn't let him. Right? He's changing the rules as we go. And what would happen is if I had accepted that right at the beginning, if I had said, okay, I will start, what that means is I just conceded the fact that he gets to change the rules whenever he wants.
Right. You kind of you let the door of madness just kind of kick wide open there.
Yeah. And it was right at the beginning and it was fast. Like, I mean, you'll miss it if you're not paying attention to that because you're already thinking, okay, this is going to be a tough conversation. I got to be ready to know what I'm going to say. We already talked about this, so the conversation might be going like that. And that's what you're thinking about. That's what I was thinking about. And then somebody throws something like that at you, you might actually take the bait because you're so ready to talk about the situation.
Right. You kind of lose the context of what's going on and how absurd it is that someone that said we need to talk has you sit down and go, so out with it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then the reason why I jumped up and quit was through the cascading effect, a situation of this, because first of all, he walks away from me. Second of all, he accuses me of wanting to be micromanaged for like wanting to know what's going on. Then he does this weird power play with the okay, I want to talk to you, so you start. And then this thing where it's like, no, you're seeing my decisions as not giving you accurate information. Which here's the pattern. Here's the pattern. He's not going to fucking stop.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So I think it's interesting here, just kind of having this conversation with you and observing the kind of stuff you said. So you are so much more acutely aware of the tactics than I am, right? I think it just goes to show that you're a lot more, obviously, clearly versed in this than I am, right? So the things, you'll notice with like my like when you're like, okay, well, what did he do there? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like for me, I definitely notice when something is wrong, right? Like,
and I think we all do intuitively.
Yeah, and I've got that part. I think the first time we talked about this, and I think we alluded to it a little bit earlier in this discussion, is something doesn't feel right. You're having a conversation and something just doesn't feel right.
Well,
and I think
I'll even tell you what the feeling is. You feel like you're losing.
Right.
And you're like, I didn't realize we're playing a game where I could lose. Why do I feel like I'm losing?
Yeah, and I think that is really poignant. I think that's a very important point to make because it's true. It's exactly how it feels. Like, wait a minute, I feel like I'm losing, right? And by all indicators, like just going and having a conversation with someone shouldn't be a situation where you feel like you're losing. Conversations are supposed to be for the exact opposite of that, right? For both, like you said,
right.
For it to be a win-win. You go and engage in discourse and discussion so you can get above the win-lose. That's the whole purpose that conversation is meant to facilitate, right? And so I'm not as good at this point, and maybe I will be later, at identifying exactly where the power struggles lie. Sometimes I can pick up on it faster than others, but I certainly know when something doesn't feel right and when something's wrong. And I know enough to be able to point a finger at manipulation in one way or another, right?
Well, let me help.
Sure, please.
So Ted, in this final manipulative tactic that he tried on me.
He sounds horrible, by the way. That sounds terrible.
But he's not unless things get heated.
Right.
That's the thing, is that you think you get along with people until you disagree with them, and then you've been trained where he says something like, okay, well, you start, and then if you do it, well, you think you're getting along, but the entire time it's a power play and he's got you under his control and you don't even realize it. Yeah. And that's just life. And you didn't fucking know that sucks.
Yeah.
What he did here at the end is he pulled a Big Lebowski.
That's unfortunate because I love that movie.
Well, that's why I'm referring to it, because everybody knows this scene where the dude does that. Well, like, that's just your opinion, man.
Yes. Yeah.
And it turns, and everybody's memed it, and it's so funny because it's so obvious that he doesn't have an argument, and so he's just dismissing it as an opinion.
Right.
So when Ted says to me, so we're having an issue where you're seeing my decisions as me not giving you accurate information, what I'm saying is an opinion. That's what that word seeing does. Where you're seeing my decisions as me not giving you accurate information. All that stuff that you just said, that's just an opinion.
Right. Yeah. It's a step to delegitimize your position.
Well, it's the step to delegitimize the position. Because if it's just an opinion, like, I can take it or leave it.
Right. Your subjective outlook on this situation is wrong, is basically what he's saying.
Well, he didn't even say it was wrong, and maybe he would have, but I didn't even let him get there.
Sure.
I'm like, no, this is not a subjective position. This is objective position.
This is what's happening. Yeah.
And I'm prepared to fight. And so this is what I mean about getting into a fight. Is I fought over this. I said, no, this is what's actually going on. And I'm not going to budge from this.
Yeah, you cut through the noise and you put your foot down.
That's what I'm talking about when it comes to fighting back. And when you can learn how to spot it, for example, spotting a Big Lebowski, and I mean, if we want to put it in terms of philosophy, this is the law of identity. Right? where there's things are what they are, therefore they're not what they're not, and objective things exist, and we're in this objective reality where there's actual things going on. What people do is they spread in these Big Lebowski words to cut us off from that, to say no, there's not some objective thing that's actually going on. That's just your weird ass perception that may or may not have anything to do with anything.
Yeah.
Of course, they're going to turn around and say something that you're supposed to take as real after that.
Right. Well, that's that's the funniest part about that, is the kind of folks that try to do that thing and twist and bend reality are the very ones that are trying to rebuild it in their image. Right. It's never like hey, these things are just all relative. It doesn't matter. Everything is just, there is no truth.
They never act on it.
Right. Exactly right. It's never like there is no truth to anything, and I'm stating this just so we can come to terms with being random beings, right? In this subjective nothingness. Instead, it's like, no, everything that you believe is a lie. Now that we've laid the groundwork for why your entire perception of reality is wrong, I will outline mine and why it is correct.
Right.
All right.
Right. Well, so what I've also noticed in the Big Lebowski, that scene, I love it because it's like and I mean, I love it because it's funny, but I also love it in terms of intellectual self-defense, because it takes what I'm talking about and makes like this ridiculous archetype of it. Right. Where in that scene, he's so obviously doesn't have an argument, and he doesn't even have a good comeback.
Yeah. Well,
and he says something that stupid.
It's just your opinion, man.
Nor you are rarely going to come across somebody who Big Lebowski's you in that way.
Right. They're gonna
be sneakier on it, and I'm trying to give a way where you could start. The listeners could start using some of this strategy. Is I find that people will build this one up. It's kind of like this rolling snowball that slowly gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger before it finally hits you with it. So, like, if we're discussing something about politics or philosophy or something, and you give me some sort of argument for something, and I come back and I'm like, hey man, so in the the scope of history, there's been a lot of different political movements and a lot of different wars and stuff, and different political movements have gone in and out, and in fact, what seem to be like really good political movements have often died and have lost. And what was considered normal, even 100 years ago, is considered crazy today, and that just repeats itself over and over and over and over and over again. So therefore, you can't really take what you've said to be have any sort of grounding in truth, because it's just going to be a passing fad.
Yeah. It's tricky, man. It's tricky.
It wasn't tricky. All that was a fancy Big Lebowski. Because what did I do? Right. All I said is, that's your opinion, man.
Yeah, well, it's just your opinion, man. I just mean that's a tricky little trick, right? It's a tricky little game to.
Well, and once you learn how to catch that one,
yeah.
First of all, you're going to see it everywhere. It's just going to be like, has everybody been fucking saying this my whole life and I never caught it?
Yeah. Well, and then the dishonest part about it is, it's like we know what we know until we don't, right? So there's like a seed of truth in what they're saying, in a sense, but that's not how.
But they don't make an argument with it,
and it's not how it works, right? Like, things aren't that loose and fast. Like I think that a lot of times the kind of stuff that you're talking about, right? Like, people are going to be quick to, like, they just make it seem like things can just change on a dime, like at a whim. And I don't think that's the way it works. It's certainly not the way, like, the scientific method works, for example, right? Like I said, we know what we know until we don't. And it's only when we don't that we can, let's go learn the next thing, right? But just this whole assumption of, so that means we know nothing ever at any time is.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Exactly.
Yeah.
Knowledge is difficult, therefore nobody can know anything ever.
You're right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So, Now, the that big snowball buildup, contrasting with like what Ted told me here, which is you're seeing my decisions as me not giving you accurate information. Where that was very quick. Like if you that was if you blink, you miss it. However, that's still a big Lebowski.
Right.
So
it's almost like when someone does I'm sorry you feel that way.
That's a narcissist move right there, man.
No, it is, but I'm just saying it almost has that same cold feeling in the delivery. Just kind, you know what I mean? That kind of like swipe at you with the statement, right? Like you're seeing the thing and saying, "I'm sorry you feel that way."
Yeah, I'm sure you are sorry I feel that way because you have to have this conversation and you really don't like it.
Right.
That's what I would say when someone says that.
It's accurate.
Yeah, I know. and if it's a narcissist, that's when they pick up and run away because they're like, "Oh my God, they're saying accurate shit about me. I can't handle this.
I've been exposed."
Yeah, I cannot look in the mirror. Anyway, so I honestly have to apologize for my own content that I haven't created because I haven't actually created a video that goes over the different techniques that I'm claiming that I've developed. The Big Lebowski is one of them. There's 5 general techniques that techniques aren't the right word. There's 5 specific patterns that I've seen that people will use over and over and over again to manipulate each other. And I feel this is what has given me the ability to spot bullshit so quickly is because something like a Big Lebowski, which is pattern number 1 in my list. If someone even starts building the way that I just did, and the way I built that one was actually very similar to what someone actually said to me, is I won't even let them get to the end. I'm like, I see where this is going, dude. I just don't have time.
Yeah, the I'm gonna stop you right there method.
Yeah, I'm exactly. I'm gonna stop you right there. This is your one chance to like get your shit together before I become unpleasant.
Right.
Because you're really unpleasant right now. So it's pretty fair.
Yeah.
I think I'll just repeat myself if I say that. Yeah, I think there's 5 basic patterns that people use, and once you get them, it's kind of like you got 80% of the game down, and that's the speed that we were talking about before.
That's right. Yeah.
If you get that speed, it just totally changes everything.
Well, it's crazy how quickly the speed comes, too.
Yeah.
It's all very impressive phenomenon to me, I guess. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. You know, I'm sure I'm talking about stuff that you're very aware of already anyhow. But I did find it was slightly impressive at the speed of which things start to come once you get on the page. And that's to be said. I mean, you can clearly tell in our discussions now that the speed that you have with it is much faster than my own. But with that said, I feel like the speed that I have with it now is much faster than it was before I started talking to you about this kind of stuff.
That's awesome. That's all I want. That's why I want to talk about it. Is not only do I want the speed faster. Well,
it's exponentially helpful when you're dealing with these kind of things. That speed, that ability.
Super happy to hear that.
Yeah, well, the ability to quickly download the information on the situation around you and affecting you is very useful, right? That's, I guess, gives you the ability to notice it when it's happening, while it's happening, right? And it avoids those George Costanza moments where you're like, oh, I should have said the thing.
Exactly. And, one of the things that I hope to do is that by putting this out the way I have is that it can be refined more. Because I don't think my tools that I developed are like the end all of the way everybody manipulates each other. I'm not even going to say that they're 100% accurate all the time. But I think they do give you about an 80% accuracy.
Well, and you're taking,
and that's pretty damn good.
and you're taking a shot at trying to solve a problem that not a lot of people are trying to solve.
Yes,
that's another big problem with it. Is I don't think that enough people. I think the phenomena of what we're talking about is something that people are cognitively aware of. I think that
some people.
I just mean kind of by and large. You hear people talking about it. People reference it when they talk about mental illness or things like that and things of this nature, right? There's names for these things that we're discussing. So it's not as if these are all giant mysteries, but it seems like the ways to always deal with this kind of stuff, it just, to me, seems lacking, at least in a lot of the stuff I've read. Yeah.
So when I stumbled across the Trivium, it kind of got broke on the internet in around 2011. It was this huge rediscovering of the Trivium, which is, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Mm-hmm. The circles that I was hanging out on the internet got all into spotting the fallacy. And I got into this too. But one of the things I started noticing is when, and this is mostly online on internet forums and stuff, that people started learning how to spot these fallacies. They would say, hey, you person I disagree with, you have committed such and such a fallacy. Well, a sophist doesn't give a shit that you've pointed out as fallacy. And in fact, if a sophist is good or you have a narcissist, they'll pick up on what you're saying and flip it on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I saw, what was being passed as intellectual self-defense was there was a good emphasis on the identification, which is we need to identify when these fallacies are being committed. But their answer of what to do with it was just to simply point it out. You've committed, you poisoned the well, you moved the goalposts, you did it ad hominem, whatever. Well, if the other person that you're talking to actually cares about having a discussion, that works.
Right.
If they don't care, it doesn't work. So, what I realized is there isn't really any information around that, at least I've been able to bump into, that says, okay, what do you do once you find out the fact that you're no longer in a discussion?
Yeah, what do you do when you feel like you're losing and you weren't previously aware of the fact that you were in a win-lose situation?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I go back to the chess metaphor. If someone starts making up moves and I'm like, oh, hey, you can't make that move. Well, if he's really nefarious, he knows that. He's doing it anyway.
Right. Right. They're fully aware of what's going on, and sometimes, right, like we said, sometimes it's not the case. The
awareness.
Yeah, the awareness. I have every reason to believe. Man, it's a tough thing to talk about because it's weird. I don't think that they're not aware of what they're doing, but I don't think they're completely aware of what they're doing either.
So this is actually a good segue to what I call pattern number 5. Awareness is irrelevant.
So you're saying it doesn't matter. Aware.
So it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about strictly about intellectual self-defense, doesn't matter at all.
Right.
So, this is actually one that frustrates the hell out of me because it's so lazy. This is like the laziest sophist move that there is, which is an appeal to intention. I didn't mean it.
I didn't mean to piss you off. Well, that doesn't really make much of a difference now that I'm pissed off now, does it?
Right. I was just trying to be polite. Okay, well, you failed.
You know what my favorite one is? I'm just blunt. I'm just blunt. Oh, that's who I am.
That's pattern number 4.
Oh, is it?
Yep. Okay. You want me to finish pattern number 5 before I go to pattern number 4? Where do you want me to go?
Yeah. I didn't mean to jump ahead. I was.
No, it's good. I like the way it's coming out. So pattern number 5 is how we judge our actions. And there's 3 ways that we could judge our actions, which is by the intention, the means, and the ends. Now, I'm sure anybody listening to this probably knows the right answer to this, which is the means is all that matters in terms of how the actions are judged. Mm-hmm. If your intentions mattered, you could intend your way out of everything. It would just be this magic spell where you're like, I'm not responsible for anything. I didn't mean it.
I didn't have bad intentions.
Yeah, I had good intentions. We're good. I didn't mean it. And there's people who try to get away with this. I mean, you'll run into this all the time. And again, somebody who's a little bit more skilled at this will have something more sophisticated to say than simply, I didn't mean it. But, kind of like that snowball example I talked about for the Big Lebowski example. But it comes down to the same thing where it's like, look, it doesn't matter that you didn't mean it. Like, if you're shooting a gun in the woods and I'm there, it doesn't matter that you didn't mean to shoot at me. I'm still getting shot at.
Yeah, I think intention can matter a lot in certain situations, but I'll
tell you where it does matter. It matters in the strategy that you choose to deal with it.
That's right. Yes.
Now, however, it doesn't matter in the sense that the manipulation is still hitting you in the same way that bullet is hitting you in my shooting into the forest example. Right. And you've got to do something. Now, if the person is literally not intending to do it, and you jump up out of your bush and you're like, hey, I'm here, don't shoot. And they go, oh, shit, sorry. I wasn't intending that. And they stop. Well, that's great.
Right.
If they keep shooting into the woods and every time you jump out, they're like, oh, I didn't mean
it. Right. That's a different thing entirely.
Yep. And then on the flip side of that is the ends, which is, okay, I shot you, and then you went to the ER, and then you ended up marrying the doctor, and she was, the best thing that ever happened to you. Therefore, it was good that I shot you. So you need to thank me for it, and I'm not responsible for having done it.
That's a good one.
Now, I have a little more respect for that, because you actually did something, and you actually can be like, look, I did X, Y, and Z, which caused you to do that. Where the intention is just kind of like this armchair quarterback, like, Matt, I didn't mean it. I could just cast this spell, and I'm not responsible for anything, Matt.
Right, like at least the second one is acknowledging the depth of the situation.
Or you actually did something to like cause the problem.
Right. You're acknowledging that you did something. You're just passing over its significance because something good came of it. Whereas the first one, it just seems to be completely unaware.
Yes. So, what was the adjective that you said that I said was pattern number 4?
Oh, I'm just blunt. That's how I am. I'm just blunt.
So that's an appeal to a deterministic aspect, which is actually a free will aspect. What you're saying is, I have the inability to change. Right. That's the way I am. It doesn't matter that you don't like the way that I'm addressing you. That's the way I am. You can't change me. That's what someone's saying is, that's what someone's saying when they're saying something like, I'm blunt, because I'm assuming you're like, I don't like the way that you're talking to me.
It's so lazy. I really hate that one a lot. Like, it just bothers me. I'm just really blunt. So, it's like, yeah,
I will give you the tool that will fix it forever.
All right, let me have it.
So here's my example for this one. And Tarek, I love you. He'll probably end up listening to this. I gave this example before and he commented on it. And he was like, dude, I love you, Tarek. No hard feelings. So Tarek was a friend I had when I was living in Austria. And we were staying together at one point. And I didn't like the way that he was talking to me. And I brought it up to him. And he said, at some point he goes, well, this is the way I talk and you can't change that. And I don't remember if I figured this out intellectually in the moment, but I remember what I said back, which is something to the effect of, well, the way I am is to get in the face and challenge people that say that, and you can't change that.
I'll take that.
And he calmed down right away after that, because what somebody's saying when they say this is the way I am and I can't change, which is essentially what they're saying when they're like, well, I'm just blunt.
Right.
Is I can't change, therefore you must.
Yep. We talked about that earlier, right? You have to change, so I don't have to.
Right. And I think the instinctual place to go is just to apply the same rules to yourself and see what happens.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, well, I can't change either. So now what do you want to do?
Well, I think you're being an insufferable asshole, and that's just how I am. That's just, I can't change that about myself. So
I would take it a step further where I think you're being an insufferable asshole. That's the way I am. And also the way I am is this is the really nasty thing that I do to insufferable assholes, and you're not going to be able to change that either.
Right. Give them a consequence.
Oh, well, let's change, because that I'm used to people that working on people and manipulating them, and apparently it's not working, and I don't want to actually have to have a fight. Which brings me to a very interesting point that I forgot to bring up, is that the reason why people engage in manipulation, as opposed to just outright dominating you, like if I want to dominate you and I'm like, hey, Vinny, fuck you. I don't like your shirt. You're ugly. And I'm going to punch you if you don't do what I say. That's just like coming out and openly dominating you. However, when I do that, it's obvious what happened. And it's obvious that if you got up and back in my face, that I deserved it because I started it. Mm-hmm. What somebody's doing when they're doing sophistry is they want the benefits of dominating you without the risk of you retaliating.
Yeah.
And what I've found is that if you retaliate, they have somewhere else to be very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like you said before, right? Like they're going to run. They're going to run. Like if you, when you were talking about with a narcissist, like finding a way to take away that support, that leverage, they're going to run. They're going to have something else to do. And I think that's pretty accurate. I think that's a good point, is that when you start removing those crutches, right, instead of trying to figure out how to stand without them, they will just find somewhere else to be.
Yeah. And I think fundamentally the reason is that they're cowards. Because if they weren't cowards, they would have just openly insulted you in the first place.
Well, if they weren't cowards, they'd have been honest about a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then, I mean, there's obviously a bully is a certain level of coward as well. But I mean, you can at least give them credit for being willing to take the risk of being open about it.
Right.
Yeah. So, and that's another reason why I encourage people to get on ornery, is show the cowards for what they really are and let them scuttle away. Let them know that, first of all, I mean, we've mentioned this a couple times, that they're not going to have their way with you, and that they should probably be careful in the future, that they might bump into somebody like you again.
Yeah, it's not always.
And they better watch their shit.
Yeah. Yep. I like it, man. I like it, and I agree. We're coming up on almost 2 hours here.
Holy fucking balls.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I'm sure there's going to be some people that won't have made it this long, and I'm sure there will be. And for the people that did, thank you. And we appreciate it. I think that this topic warrants a bit more length. I think it's good. But in case you're still interested and you'd still like to hear more about what Dylan has to say about this, I would recommend you find your way over to YouTube and search for the Volitional Science Network. That's his YouTube channel. And what are some of the titles? I know you've got a bunch of different videos there. You've got videos on economics. You've got some interviews. You've got videos on this topic. So what are the titles of some of the videos that people can look for? And I will include them in the show notes below.
Well, I would recommend going to my playlists, and I've got one called Intellectual Self-Defense.
Oh, perfect. Perfect.
They're all right there. The whole economics thing was kind of an accident. I wasn't planning on doing economics videos, and then I met Nima, and then I'm like, we should talk about this MMT thing. And then we started Amagi, and I'm like, shit, I'm making more fucking economics videos than I am making intellectual self-defense videos. So you might have to weed through the economic stuff a little bit to get to the intellectual self-defense, but I do have a playlist, and you can just go straight to it.
Okay, cool. Is there anything else that you would want to bring up? Oh yeah, and Dylan mentioned Amagi, and I like to call it out again. So you can go ahead and find the Think Liberty Network anywhere that you can that you usually look for podcasts. And if you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you're already familiar with the Think Liberty Podcast Network in the first place. And if you haven't listened to Amagi, you should go over there and do so. The work that Dylan does with Nima is it's good stuff. And even if you don't agree with all of it, it's still very informative and interesting, just so long as you're not being a sophist asshole about it. And setting out to dominate all of the topics that you don't fully understand. Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to call out before we get out of here?
Call out a sophist, or
no. I mean, like any plugs, anything you're working on, you want to put people's attention toward, or do you think we covered it all?
I'll plug this, and it's not really a plug because I haven't made it yet. And I keep talking about wanting to make it, but I'm a perfectionist and I just haven't gotten it to the level that I want to, is the 4 circuits of human interaction. I've alluded to them somewhat in this conversation. I didn't directly say circuit, but when I was talking about the muscle movements required for the things that we do, for, like walking across the room versus feeling something versus thinking something, and how there's kind of these different planes that we're on. And for example, if the discussion plane meets the domination plane, the domination plane just wins by default. It sets the stage for what's going on. And I think I can explain that in a way that not only makes sense, but really helps further the intellectual self-defense thing, because it helps us understand how we're actually communicating with each other. So I don't know if, Vinny, I might even ask you to help me talk about it, because it's a lot easier for me to have a conversation than it is to just yak at a webcam by myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really want to talk about that, the 4 circuits of human interaction. And so whenever it comes out, look for it.
Yeah, and if you want to have a discussion with me as a way to explore it more, or if you want to have a discussion after you release it, or any way you want to go about it, I'm totally open to it. Let me know, and we will we'll do whatever we got to do to have that discussion.
Excellent.
Awesome, man. Well, boy, I appreciated your time. Almost